By the time the proctor found me asleep, my cheek was stuck to page 1 of the entrance exam, my pencil had rolled under the desk, and the girl who had ruined my first life was smiling 3 rows ahead of me as if she had just inherited the sun. I remember the proctor's shoes before I remember his face. Polished black leather, one lace frayed at the end, stopping beside my desk with a tiny squeak against the waxed floor. Around us, 200 candidates scratched answers into booklets with the desperate rhythm of rain on glass. The Hall of Ascension was supposed to be silent, but silence in a room like that was never empty. It was full of swallowed panic, shifting knees, pages turning too fast, and ambition dressed up as discipline. My own paper was blank except for a faint gray crescent where my forehead had pressed against it. In the old life, that sight would have destroyed me. In this one, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. The proctor bent down, smelling faintly of mint and old coffee, and whispered, "Candidate 116, are you unwell?" I opened my eyes just enough to see Celeste Marlowe glance back. Golden Girl Celeste, the Academy's perfect charity face, with honey blonde hair tied in a ribbon the color of first place, eyes what with fake concern, mouth curved like a secret. Her answer booklet was nearly full. Her wrist moved without hesitation. Her borrowed mind was working exactly as I had hoped. So I yawned, slow and shameless, folded my arms over the blank paper, and went back to sleep. I had returned to my life at 5:12 that morning, not in a hospital bed or under lightning, but on the bathroom floor with a toothbrush in my hand and blood that did not belong there still vivid in my memory. In my first life, I had died at 27 in a storage room beneath the Hall of Records, locked inside after trying to steal back the file that proved Celeste had never earned her place at Bear Crown Academy. A burst pipe had drowned the basement, or that was what the newspaper said. The official report described it as a tragic accident involving an unstable former candidate with a grudge. My mother had signed a statement saying grief had made me obsessive. Celeste attended my memorial wearing white and cried into a handkerchief embroidered with my initials, because of course, she had stolen those too. The last thing I remembered was water rising over my mouth while the security light above me flickered, and the last sound I heard was Celeste's voice through the locked door, soft as silk, saying, "Mira, you should have let me keep what the world already believed was mine." Then I opened my eyes 8 years earlier with toothpaste foam on my tongue, a zit on my chin, and my mother shouting from the kitchen that if I missed the academy shuttle, I would embarrass the entire family. The entrance exam was that day. The theft was that day. The beginning of everything I lost was still waiting to happen. Most people thought Celeste Marlowe copied homework. That was the childish version, the one jealous students whispered when she won prizes too often and teachers praised her essays with a little too much awe. The truth was colder and stranger. Celeste did not copy words. She copied direction. She had a way of standing close enough to make your thoughts feel crowded, asking one sweet question while watching your pupils, your breathing, your little habits of hesitation, and somehow taking the shape of your reasoning before you knew you had given it away. In our district, rich parents called it intuition. Tutors called it adaptive intelligence. The academy called it brilliance. In my first life, I discovered the real method years too late. A banned neural training implant hidden beneath the gold charm bracelet she never removed, paired with a thin conductive patch she slipped onto the skin of whoever she wanted to harvest. The device did not read full sentences like magic. It scraped patterns, stress spikes, recall rhythms, answer confidence, visual associations, the tiny electrical signatures that appeared when a trained mind recognized a solution. For an ordinary student, it produced noise. For me, it produced a map. I was not a genius in the glowing, effortless way Celeste pretended to be. I was worse for people like her. I was methodical. I built memory palaces, cross-checked assumptions, solved problems in layers, and kept answer pathways so clean that a parasite could walk through them without leaving footprints. In my first life, I sat for the Vare Crown entrance exam with Celeste behind me and my cousin Liana at my right, both of them smiling as if we were just 3 girls chasing the same dream. Vare Crown was not an ordinary school. It was the door to everything. Full scholarships to university, government fellowships, internships in courts and laboratories, names engraved in alumni halls where ministers and surgeons and judges came back to recruit their own kind. In my family, one child entering Ver Crown meant every auntie, uncle, and neighbor would speak our surname differently. My mother pressed my collar that morning until the fabric shone. My father, before the illness hollowed him out, had tucked a $20 note into my palm and whispered, "Eat after." Thinking, take sugar. I had loved him for that. I had loved all of them too easily. That was why, when Celeste complained of trembling hands outside the hall and asked to hold my wrist, just for a second, I let her. That was when the skin patch went on, disguised as a tiny silver star she said had fallen from her bracelet. During the exam, she copied my confidence pattern question by question, corrected the 2 deliberate traps I had solved, and finished 12 minutes before me. Our answers matched so closely that the examiners assumed collusion. Celeste cried first, so they believed her first. Her family's lawyers said I had pressured the beloved scholarship ambassador. My family said I should apologize before the scandal swallowed us. I was barred for academic misconduct, and Celeste entered Ver Crown with my score, wearing her own name. That first disgrace was not loud at first. It arrived in envelopes and lowered voices. My father stopped meeting my eyes because every hospital bill made the scholarship I had lost feel like a body part we could have sold to save him. My mother began using Celeste as a unit of measurement. Celeste would not speak like that. Celeste still studies after dinner. Celeste turned pain into discipline. I became the cautionary tale at every family gathering. Liana, who had helped Celeste get close to me, pretended she had been shocked by my choices. Teachers who once praised my essays avoided my gaze. The academy sent a polite letter explaining that all appeals had been exhausted. I spent years taking side routes through inferior programs, then night classes, then temporary clerkships where people loved my work as long as my name was not attached to ambition. Celeste rose beautifully. She became the golden girl in magazine profiles, the prodigy who overcame poverty with grace, the speaker at Ver Crown's Centennial Gala, the youngest policy fellow in the ministry. Every speech she gave contained one sentence from my private notebooks. Every award photo showed the same bracelet on her wrist. When I finally found a retired examiner willing to admit there had been biometric irregularities, when I gathered the old seating charts and access logs and lab reports proving the device existed, I made one mistake. I told Celeste I had proof. The next night, I died in a locked basement beneath the Hall of Records while she stood outside, and explained that nobody would believe a ghost. So when I came back, I did not scream, accuse, warn, or run. I rinsed the toothpaste from my mouth, stared at my 17-year-old face in the mirror, and laughed so quietly that my mother knocked on the door to ask if I was choking. I looked younger than grief, younger than shame, younger than the woman who had learned to read corruption by the temperature of a handshake. My hair was still cut bluntly at my shoulders because I had not yet grown it out after the first humiliation. My hands were still soft because they had not yet sorted evidence in freezing archives until the knuckles cracked. On the sink sat the little blue exam admission card with my legal name printed in black. Mira Calder, Candidate 116. Under it was a folded note in my mother's handwriting telling me to be kind to Celeste because girls like her need encouragement. I picked up the card and felt the old rage rise, so hard it almost made me careless. Then I noticed the time. 5:14. The shuttle to Ver Crown would leave at 6:40. The exam would begin at 9 o'clock. Celeste would touch my wrist at 8:32. The bracelet would start harvesting at 8:41. The investigators would compare our answer patterns at 2:10 in the afternoon. I had less than 4 hours to turn my own mind into poison ground. The first thing I did was not study. I had already studied for that exam for 2 lifetimes. I opened my desk drawer and removed the old black cassette recorder my father used to keep for interviews before phones made everyone lazy. It still worked. I pressed record and sat on the edge of my bed, speaking into it as if leaving a confession for a version of myself who might fail. My name is Mira Calder. Today is March 14th. Celeste Marlowe will attempt to use a banned neural assistive device during the Ver Crown entrance examination. She will try to harvest my answer confidence through skin contact before the exam and through proximity during the test. In my possession are 3 facts only the guilty party will act on. She will avoid metal detectors by claiming her bracelet is welded medical jewelry. She will insist on sitting behind me, and she will answer questions from the old reserve paper if I see those patterns strongly enough. My voice shook once on the word guilty, so I stopped, breathed, and started again. I recorded the entire plan, including the parts that made me sound insane, because in the first life I had learned that truth without a timestamp was just a story powerful people could laugh at. Then I sealed the cassette in a padded envelope addressed to the Academy's integrity office and placed it in my father's old briefcase, the one my mother never touched because it still smelled like him. The second thing I did was uglier. I opened my memory palace and burned it down. Not literally, of course. My mind had always been a house with clean rooms, history in the East Corridor, mathematical identities in the blue kitchen, logic puzzles arranged on a staircase with one missing step. That morning, I walked through it deliberately and replaced every polished tool with junk. I hung wrong formulas over the fireplace. I placed a prime number theorem inside a bathtub filled with orange feathers. I painted answer choices from a retired sample paper onto the walls in bright red. B, D, A, C, E, C, B, B, D. I repeated them while brushing my hair, while buttoning my blouse, while swallowing breakfast I could barely taste. The goal was not to forget the real answers. The goal was to make the surface of my thinking irresistible and false. Celeste's device could not steal deep understanding if I refused to activate it. It could only harvest what I lit up. So I lit up nonsense until it glowed. Then, because the title of my revenge had already written itself in my blood, I crushed 2 tablets of the mild sleep medication my doctor had prescribed after my father's first hospital scare in the old timeline, mixed them into a bottle of sweet milk tea, and wrote on the label in thick marker, "Drink only after arrival." In the first life, Celeste drugged my future. In this one, I would drug my usefulness. My mother noticed the milk tea before she noticed my face. "You are not taking that into the exam," she said, snapping the lid onto a container of rice rolls with the authority of a woman who believed control could replace love if applied early enough. "Caffeine will make your hands shake. Celeste says she never drinks anything but warm water before a test." There it was, before sunrise, the first Celeste of the day. I looked at my mother across the kitchen table and felt a tenderness so old and tired it no longer knew where to land. In the first life, I had spent years wanting her to choose me. In this life, I understood that some people did not choose their daughters. They chose the version of the family story that embarrassed them least. "It's not caffeine," I said. "It helps me stay calm." She frowned, already irritated by my calmness because she preferred my anxiety where she could manage it. "Do not make yourself small today, Mira. You have one chance to repair what people think of us. Repair what people think of us. Not build your life. Not show them what you can do." I tucked the bottle into my bag and smiled with my teeth. I know exactly what this day is for. My younger brother, half asleep over his cereal, muttered, "Creepy," and for one bright second I loved him simply because he was honest enough to be useless. The Academy shuttle waited outside the district library, shining black under a gray morning sky. Candidates clustered in anxious little herds, scholarship hopefuls with polished shoes, legacy children pretending not to be nervous, parents adjusting collars one last time, tutors whispering formulas as if prayer could be monetized. Celeste stood near the front wearing cream wool and gold hairpins shaped like laurel leaves, the unofficial uniform of girls everyone expected to win. Cameras from the local education channel hovered around her because she had already been chosen as the face of merit without privilege, although the bracelet on her wrist cost more than my father's monthly medication. When she saw me, her expression warmed by 2 precise degrees. "Mira," she called, opening her arms as if we had survived something together instead of standing at the mouth of the thing she planned to do to me. In the old life, I hurried toward her, grateful she wanted my friendship in public. In this one, I walked slowly enough to make her wait. The cameras loved it. 2 girls from modest districts, one golden, one severe, greeting each other before the most important exam of their lives. Celeste took my hands. Her thumb brushed the inside of my wrist once, twice, searching. I let her feel skin and pulse and nothing else. The silver star patch was hidden between her fingers, ready. I leaned closer and whispered, "You look tired." Her smile flickered. It was so small nobody else would have seen it, but I had died studying the architecture of that face. "Do I?" she asked.
No.
"Perfect, actually." Then I allowed the star to touch my wrist. The patch felt colder than I remembered. In my first life, I had thought it was a bit of fallen jewelry and pressed it back into her palm with a laugh. This time I felt the tiny adhesive bite, felt the faint metallic pull as it settled against my pulse, and nearly had to bite my tongue to stop myself from ripping it off and shoving it down her throat. Celeste's eyes softened with relief, which told me the device had paired. She squeezed my hand. "Let's do our best today," she said loudly enough for the cameras. "No matter what happens, I believe we both deserve to be here." The sentence was perfect. Generous, humble, quotable. I wondered how many times she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror paid for by someone else's labor. "Me too," I said. Then I reached into my bag, unscrewed my milk tea, and drank half of it in front of her. Celeste's gaze flicked to the bottle. A tiny calculation passed through her eyes. If she had expected me alert, she would now have to decide whether drowsiness made me dangerous or easier. That was the first hook in the trap. Parasites hate uncertainty because they survive by predicting the host. "Nervous stomach?" she asked softly. "Something like that." The patch warmed against my wrist as I began reciting the false answer sequence inside my head with the bright panic of a girl trying too hard not to forget. B, D, A, C, E, C, B, B, D. Celeste's pupils widened almost imperceptibly. "There you are," I thought.
Start eating.
Vare Crown Academy had been built on a hill overlooking the city, as if ambition itself required altitude. The entrance hall smelled of cedar, stone dust, and expensive raincoats. Portraits of alumni watched from the walls with the smug patience of people whose scandals had already become scholarships. In the old life, I entered that hall trembling with hope. This time, I entered it counting cameras, exits, metal detectors, staff badges, and places where an envelope could disappear. The integrity office sat beside the registration desk, its frosted glass door marked with a motto that had ruined me once: "Truth is proven by procedure." I almost laughed when I saw it. Procedure had never loved truth. Procedure loved whoever could afford to arrive first with a lawyer. But procedure could be sharpened. While candidates queued for identity checks, I stepped out of line and approached the oldest staff member at the side counter, a woman with silver hair, tired eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested she had survived more administrators than any of them deserved. Her name tag read MRS, Ansel. In my first life, I knew her only as the registrar who later whispered to me, after the appeal failed, that some irregularities had made people uncomfortable. She had looked sorry but not brave. Today I needed sorry to become useful. I slid the padded envelope across the counter. "This is for the integrity office. It contains a time-sensitive allegation about prohibited neural devices in today's exam. Please stamp receipt before the first paper begins." Mrs. Ansel looked at me, then at the envelope, then at the cameras behind me. That is a serious claim. That is why I am making it before I have a score to protect. She could have refused. In another story, maybe she would have. But I had spent 8 years learning the pressure points of cautious people, and Mrs. Ansel's pressure point was procedure. I had written the envelope exactly according to policy: candidate number, exam session, alleged misconduct category, request for preservation of surveillance and biometric logs, and a line stating that failure to register the complaint before the exam might compromise chain of custody. People who feared responsibility loved chain of custody because it gave fear a uniform. Mrs. Ansel stamped the envelope with a heavy red mark and entered the receipt number into the system. I watched every keystroke. Behind me, Celeste laughed for a camera, bright and bell-like. "Will I receive confirmation?" I asked. Mrs. Ansel printed a receipt and placed it in my palm. "You will receive acknowledgement after the session." Her voice lowered. "Are you safe?" That question nearly broke something in me. Not because I was unsafe, but because no adult had asked me that in the first life until after safety no longer mattered. I folded the receipt into the lining of my exam admission card. I will be once everyone follows the rules. Then I returned to the queue, where Celeste's gaze met mine for half a second too long. She had not heard the words, but she had seen me at the integrity counter. For the first time that morning, her smile had to work for its living. The seating assignment board stood beneath a skylight, glowing on a digital screen that shuffled candidates into rows by algorithm. In the old life, Celeste bribed a junior invigilator to move behind me, then acted surprised when we ended up close. This time, because I had recorded that prediction, I wanted her to do it again. The first board displayed me in seat D14 and Celeste in F02, far enough apart to starve her device. I watched her read it. Her eyes moved once toward the hallway, where staff carried spare rosters. 5 minutes later, a young man with a blue invigilator badge hurried to the control tablet and frowned theatrically. "System correction," he announced. Some seats were misallocated due to accommodation spacing. The board blinked. My seat became C11. Celeste's became C14. Directly behind me, separated by 2 desks and a perfect line of sight. The old anger rose again, hot enough to clear the medication fog beginning at the edges of my skull. In my first life, that change had looked like fate. In this one, it was a signature. Mrs. Ansell, bless her procedural soul, looked up from the registration desk and saw the change too.
I made sure she saw me seeing it.
Then I turned toward Celeste with the soft confusion of someone too innocent to understand why luck always knelt for the same people. "Oh," I said. "We're close after all." Celeste touched her bracelet. "Maybe that means we're meant to encourage each other." Maybe. Inside my head, I lit another false corridor and filled it with last year's wrong solutions. The Hall of Ascension swallowed us at 8:53. It was an old theater converted into an exam chamber, with tiered rows of individual desks facing a stage where a giant clock glowed above the proctors. Velvet curtains hung at the sides, red as fresh wounds. The air was too cold, probably to keep candidates awake, which made my plan almost funny. Each desk held 3 sealed booklets, a pencil, an eraser, a water cup, and a printed warning that prohibited communication, electronic devices, memory aids, and biological enhancement tools. Biological enhancement tools. The phrase had become part of my nightmares after I discovered the bracelet's classification years later. Celeste sat behind me with the delicate rustle of someone arranging herself for an audience. I did not look back. I removed the silver star patch from my wrist only after the proctors began reading instructions, not by peeling it off but by pressing my sleeve over it and sliding a second adhesive tab I had prepared beneath the edge. The device remained attached, but now it rested partly over a thin copper foil strip I had taken from my brother's broken science kit. I did not know enough engineering to disable it cleanly. I knew enough to make it hungry and inaccurate. The signal it harvested would be bright, distorted, and full of the mental garbage I had spent the morning rehearsing. B, D, A, A, C, E, lighthouse, feathers, orange bathtub, my father's voice saying thinking take sugar, a courtroom door, a drowned archive, the smell of mint coffee, Celeste's bracelet glowing like a guilty star. The chief proctor broke the seal at 9 o'clock. 200 booklets opened like wings. I opened mine too, saw the first page, and almost smiled. The questions were not identical to the old timeline, but close enough in structure for my real mind to start solving them automatically. That was the danger. I loved problems. Even after betrayal, even after death, a clean problem still pulled me toward it like a window left open in a burning house. Question 1 involved a logic grid about witnesses, train times, and contradictory testimony. My fingers twitched toward the pencil. Behind me, Celeste's bracelet warmed. The parasite was waiting. I forced myself to read the question wrong. I imagined the witnesses as birds. I imagined the train arriving underwater. I repeated the false answer sequence until my real reasoning retreated behind a locked door. Then I took another drink of milk tea, folded my arms, and lowered my head onto the paper. The first wave of sleep did not come gently. It dragged at my bones, thick and humiliating. Panic tried to wake me, because exams had been sacred to me once. I had built my entire identity on staying awake longer, trying harder, proving more. To sleep through the entrance exam felt like smashing a temple with my own hands. But the temple had been built for thieves. So I breathed in the scent of paper and pencil shavings, listened to the room fade into scratching rain, and let darkness take me. Sleep did not make my mind empty. That was the beautiful part. It made my mind uncontrollable. I dreamed in pieces, and the pieces had teeth. I was 7 years old eating mango slices on the back steps, while my father recited multiplication tables in a pirate voice. I was 21 sitting outside an appeal hearing while Celeste's lawyer described me as unstable. I was underwater in the archive, watching answer sheets float past like dead fish. I was in a train station where every sign said D, A, C, B, except the platform numbers were my candidate ID and Celeste's birthday. I dreamed of the old reserve paper I had memorized from the evidence file, the one Celeste's device would mistake for confidence because I had polished it until it shone. In the dream, question 17 asked which girl deserved a future, and every option was written in Celeste's handwriting. Somewhere above me, the real hall continued. Pencils moved. Proctors walked. Celeste harvested the storm and tried to turn it into answers. That was what I understood about her better than anyone. She did not know how to sit with uncertainty. If my mind gave her a bright pattern, she would trust it, because the whole world had trained her to believe stolen brightness belonged to her. So while I slept, she wrote. She wrote answers from last year's reserve paper, where the new exam required original reasoning. She wrote confident contradictions. She wrote one essay argument I had planted in my dream palace specifically because it sounded brilliant until the third paragraph, where it proved the opposite of the prompt. She copied not my knowledge, but my bait. I woke once when a proctor touched my shoulder. The hall had shifted into that middle exam heaviness, where the first panic had burned off and the second had not yet arrived. The giant clock showed 10:18. My mouth tasted sweet and metallic. The proctor was young, the same one who had changed the seating chart, and his eyes flicked from my blank paper to Celeste behind me. That flicker told me enough. He whispered, Candidate 116, you must attempt the paper. Sleeping may result in an automatic 0. In the old life, I would have apologized until I disappeared. This time, I raised my head, looked directly at the small body camera clipped to his lapel, and said clearly, I understand. I am choosing not to generate examinable responses during this session. His face changed. Not much, but enough. The sentence was not normal. It sounded like policy, and policy frightened people who had stepped outside it. Are you refusing the exam? He asked.
No.
I am preserving the integrity of the exam. A student nearby stopped writing for half a second. Celeste's pencil paused behind me. I let my eyelids droop again. Please record that I have not communicated with any candidate and that my booklet remains blank. The proctor swallowed. He had expected a sleepy girl he could dismiss, not a candidate speaking like a future lawsuit. Continue, he muttered, though he did not say to whom. I lowered my head again, and as sleep returned, I heard Celeste's pencil begin moving faster. At 11:07, the first disruption hit the room. Not a shout.
Not yet.
A chime from the proctor's tablet, sharp enough to cut through 200 thoughts at once. The chief proctor stepped aside to answer it, listened for 10 seconds, then looked toward row C. I kept my eyes closed, but I felt the gaze pass over me like cold water and land on Celeste.
She did not stop writing.
That was another thing about stolen confidence. It made fools brave at the exact moment they should be afraid. The chief proctor walked down the aisle with Mrs. Ansell beside him. Interesting. Registrar, not security. Procedure had arrived wearing sensible shoes. Candidate 119, the chief proctor whispered behind me. Please place your pencil down. Celeste gave a tiny, startled laugh, sweet enough to rot teeth. Is something wrong? Pencil down. Around us, writing slowed. A public interruption during Bear Crown's entrance exam was almost unheard of. In my first life, the interruption came after the exam, in a private room where Celeste cried and I was cornered. This time, it came while her booklet was still warm. Celeste set the pencil down. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding." Mrs. Ansell's voice cut in, quiet but carrying. "Your seating reassignment has been flagged for review, and an integrity complaint was received before the paper began. We are preserving materials from this row." There was a tiny silence, the kind that opens under a liar's feet. Then Celeste said the sentence I had been waiting for. "Mira can explain. We studied together." There it was. The bridge she needed me to walk onto so she could burn it beneath us both. In the old life, she said the same thing in a private investigation room, and I, terrified of seeming cruel, admitted we had reviewed sample questions together. That admission became the rope around my neck. Today I lifted my head slowly, hair stuck to my cheek, blank paper beneath me, and looked back at her with the full calm of a woman who had already attended her own funeral. We did not study together. My voice was rough from sleep, which made it sound more honest than any performance. Celeste's eyes widened, then watered on command. "Mira, don't do this. We talked about strategies. You said if one of us panicked, the other should remember the patterns." Brilliant. She was adapting. If my booklet was blank, she would frame the connection as emotional coaching, shared preparation, something soft enough to blur.
I blinkse her.
I have been asleep. A nervous ripple moved through the row. Someone coughed. Celeste looked at my blank booklet, and for the first time truly understood that I had not simply underperformed. I had removed myself as a source. Her face stayed golden, but her throat tightened. The chief proctor collected my booklet, then hers. When he lifted Celeste's, I saw page after page filled with neat, confident writing. Beautiful handwriting. My handwriting's rhythm, almost. The sight punched the air from my lungs for 1 second.
Trauma is stupid that way.
Even when the trap works, the old wound still recognizes the knife. Mrs. Ansell placed both booklets into separate evidence sleeves and sealed them in front of the row. The exam did not stop, for everyone else. Institutions hate visible scandal because it reminds spectators that systems are made of humans and tape. The chief proctor told the hall to continue writing, but nobody wrote normally after that. You could feel curiosity crawling along the desks. Celeste was escorted to a side room. I was told to remain seated until the session ended because removing me might create further distraction, which was administrator language for we do not know whether you are victim, villain, or lawsuit.
Fine.
I slept again. Not deeply this time, more like floating beneath the ceiling of my own body while whispers tried to become rumors around me. I dreamed of my father sitting in the audience at an award ceremony that never happened. I dreamed of my mother clapping for Celeste while my own hands disappeared. When the final bell rang at noon, candidates exhaled as if released from underwater. Booklets were collected. Chairs scraped. The hall filled with the frantic post-exam noise of people trying to guess their futures from fragments. I remained in my seat until Mrs. Ansell came for me. Her face was pale. "Mira," she said, "not candidate 116 now. The integrity office needs your statement." I stood too quickly and swayed. She reached out, then stopped herself as if afraid touch itself had become evidence. "Did you ingest anything unusual?" she asked. "Only my own milk tea." "Can it be tested?" "Yes." I handed her the bottle. It still had my fingerprints, my label, and enough residue to prove the sleep was mine. They put me in interview room B, which in the first life had smelled of bleach and accusation. This time it smelled of toner and fear. A camera blinked in the corner. A glass wall showed a corridor where staff walked too quickly while pretending not to hurry. Across the table sat Mrs. Ansell, the chief proctor, and a woman I recognized with a jolt so sharp it cleared the fog from my head, Dr. Ilora Sen, external chair of exam integrity. In my first life, I had found her signature on the report that quietly disagreed with my punishment, but had been overruled by the Academy Board. She had retired 2 years later, rumored to have resigned over ethical conflicts. Today she was younger, sharper, still wearing her black hair in a severe knot, and looking at me as if I were either a very clever child or a very dangerous one. "Candidate Calder," she said, "before we proceed, are you medically stable?" "Sleepy, not unstable." The chief proctor disliked that answer. Dr. Sen almost smiled. You submitted a misconduct allegation before the exam. You then slept through the exam after making no attempt to answer. Candidate Marlowe, seated behind you after a last-minute roster change, produced a complete paper containing multiple response patterns that correspond to reserve materials not released to candidates. Her biometric data also shows synchronized spikes with your recorded sleep stage disruptions, despite your lack of written activity. Explain what you believe happened. I folded my hands on the table. Celeste Marlowe tried to copy my mind. I gave her dreams. The chief proctor actually closed his eyes, perhaps praying for retirement. Dr. Sen did not laugh. That was why I had trusted her signature in the old records. She asked, when you say copy your mind, do you mean she obtained your answers through prior collaboration, observation, or technological interference? Technological interference, assisted by skin contact pairing before the exam and proximity during the session. I rolled up my sleeve and showed them the silver star patch still half adhered near the copper foil. Mrs. Ansel inhaled. The chief proctor leaned forward. Dr. Sen put on gloves before touching anything, which I appreciated more than any comfort she could have offered. She removed the patch with tweezers and placed it in an evidence tray. Did candidate Marlowe attach this?
Yes.
At the shuttle stop. There may be footage from the Education Channel cameras. Why did you not report it immediately? Because last time, reporting after she succeeded was too late. The room went still. There are sentences you should not say if you want to seem sane. There are also sentences that become unavoidable when your life has already ended once. Dr. Sen studied me. Last time, I looked at the blinking camera and made a choice. I would not explain rebirth. Not because I feared disbelief, but because impossible truths make convenient distractions. Last time I trusted adults to notice patterns only after damage was done, I said. This time I created a clean record before the damage could be assigned to me. Clean record was the magic phrase. Dr. Sen asked for my receipt. I produced it from the lining of my admission card. She asked for the cassette envelope. Mrs. Ansel confirmed it had been stamped before the exam and stored unopened in the integrity office safe. The chain was intact. When they played the tape, my morning voice filled the room, younger and colder than I expected, predicting the bracelet, the seating change, the attempt to connect us through studying together, and the false answer sequence I had planted. The chief proctor's face drained color by the second. Mrs. Ansel looked at the table. Dr. Sen took notes, without interrupting. On the tape, I said, if candidate Marlowe submits responses derived from my seated reserve paper pattern while my booklet remains blank or non-responsive, this supports unauthorized cognitive harvesting rather than collaboration. Please compare her response confidence timing to my biometric state and preserve the bracelet. Hearing myself speak that way made me want to laugh and cry. 17-year-old Mira should have been worrying about essay prompts and cafeteria rumors, not designing an evidentiary trap because the adults around her were too impressed by golden hair. When the tape ended, Dr. Sen rewound 10 seconds and played the false answer sequence again. B, D, A, C, E, C, B, B, D. Then she opened Celeste's answer summary. The first 10 multiple-choice questions matched exactly. Not the correct answers. My bait. They kept me in that room for 2 hours while the academy tried to decide how much truth it could survive. I gave a formal statement. I described the shuttle stop, the wrist touch, the bracelet, the seating change, the medication, the copper foil, the false memory pattern, and the proctor's mid-exam warning. I did not mention drowning, future newspaper clippings, or the way Celeste's voice had sounded through a locked door. Some truths are not for committees. They are for graves. At 2:36, a security officer brought in a sealed evidence bag containing Celeste's bracelet. Without it, she looked strangely unfinished on the hallway monitor, like a saint missing her halo. Dr. Sen requested a technical scan. The scan found a concealed transmitter, a micro battery, and adaptive signal software registered to a discontinued neurofeedback startup funded by Celeste's uncle. The device was illegal in testing environments and restricted even in clinical ones. At 3:10, footage from the shuttle stop arrived. Celeste holding my hands. Celeste's thumb pressing the patch to my wrist. Celeste looking down as I drank the milk tea. At 3:44, the seating tablet audit arrived. The change had been entered using the login of the young invigilator who warned me to attempt the paper, but the authorization code came from an administrative terminal assigned to Celeste's mother, who sat on the Academy's Donor Advisory Council. The room became quieter with each new fact. Corruption often begins as a rumor and ends as a spreadsheet. Celeste's first official defense was panic. Her second was charity.
Her third was me.
I watched all three through the glass because Dr. Sen, perhaps understanding that secrecy had once been the weapon used against me, did not close the blinds. In interview room A, Celeste sat between her mother and a lawyer who had arrived so fast he must have been waiting nearby. Her eyes were swollen but beautiful. She cried like a person trained by mirrors. "I thought the patch was jewelry," she said first. Mira dropped it. Then, when they showed the footage, she pressed a hand to her mouth. I only touched her because she looked frightened. When they showed the device scan, her mother leaned in and murmured something. Celeste changed shape. "Mira has always been intense," she said softly. She talked about answer patterns all week. She said the academy was unfair and that girls like us had to help each other. Maybe she wanted us to match, so we would both be admitted or both be rejected. There it was again. Drag me into the fire, then call the Burns sisterhood. Dr. Sen did not look moved. She played the cassette. Celeste went very still. I saw the moment she understood that her reactions had been predicted before she made them. It is a particular kind of terror, being known by someone you dismissed as prey. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Celeste Marlowe looked at a room full of adults and found no ready-made sympathy waiting for her. My mother arrived at 4:20 wearing her church coat and the expression she used when she wanted strangers to know she had been inconvenienced by morality. Nobody had called her at first because I was 17 and still technically a minor, but once lawyers appeared, procedure remembered I had a parent. She burst into interview room B asking what I had done, not whether I was hurt, not why security had taken Celeste's bracelet. What had I done? The sentence landed exactly where I expected, and because I expected it, it did not cut as deeply. "I slept," I said. Apparently that was enough. My mother stared at me, then at Dr. Sen. "Mira is under pressure. She can be dramatic. Celeste is a good girl from a difficult background. There must be confusion." Mrs. Ansel flinched. Dr. Sen's pen stopped moving. I wanted, briefly and violently, to ask my mother how difficult a background had to be before stealing from me became acceptable. Instead, I placed my hands flat on the table and said, "The evidence is recorded. Please do not make a statement on my behalf unless you have reviewed it." My mother's cheeks flushed. She hated being corrected by me in public. "I am your mother. Then act like it after you read the file." The silence that followed was not respectful. It was shocked.
Good.
Some rooms need shock before they can make space for truth. To understand why my mother defended Celeste, you have to understand the economy of admiration in families that have spent too long feeling small. Celeste was not our blood, but she had grown up beside us, the daughter of my mother's best friend, the bright child every adult used to prove sacrifice worked. She carried grocery bags for old neighbors when cameras were nearby. She tutored younger students with worksheets I wrote. She sent thank you notes to donors in handwriting soft enough to make wealthy women cry. My mother looked at her and saw what poverty might become if polished correctly. She looked at me and saw the frightening part of ambition, the part that asks why the rules bend for some girls and break over others. In the old life, when the academy accused me, my mother chose the story that cost her less socially. A daughter who cheated was embarrassing, but a daughter destroyed by a beloved girl everyone praised was unbearable because it required war. This time, I watched her stand in the doorway between interview room B and the corridor where Celeste sobbed prettily for staff, and I saw the old decision flicker behind her eyes. She wanted me to soften. She wanted me to say maybe it was a misunderstanding. She wanted a version of justice that did not require her to lose face at church. I loved her. I also let her fail the test she had always given me. At 5:05, Their Crown's emergency review panel convened in the old council chamber. I had seen that room only once in my first life, after the decision had already been written elsewhere. Back then, I sat at one end of the long table while adults used kind voices to bury me. This time, I entered with Dr. Sen beside me, Mrs. Ansell carrying evidence, and a lawyer from the Public Candidates Advocacy Office who had been summoned because the Academy finally understood the size of the hole beneath its feet. The chamber windows overlooked the city. Late sun poured across the floor in gold rectangles, which seemed unfair because Celeste looked best in gold. She sat opposite me in a white blouse, bracelet gone, wrist bare and slightly red where the clasp had been removed. Without the device, she did not look powerless. That would be too simple. She looked furious under the tears, and fury suited her better than sweetness. Her mother sat rigid beside her. The young invigilator stared at his own hands. My mother sat behind me, but not quite with me. The panel chair, a narrow man named Dean Orvek, began with institutional language about unfortunate irregularities. Dr. Sen interrupted him on the third sentence. This is not an irregularity. It is a coordinated attempt to compromise an entrance examination using prohibited neural harvesting technology, unauthorized seating manipulation, and post-incident narrative contamination. I nearly smiled. Some people bring knives to a room. Dr. Sen brought vocabulary. Celeste's lawyer tried to attack the sleep first. Candidate Calder deliberately rendered herself unable to take the exam, which suggests premeditated disruption. Her so-called bait sequence may have been shared with my client during prior preparation, then used to frame her when Candidate Calder lost confidence. It was not a terrible argument. In another room with less evidence, it might have worked. The panel chair looked relieved to hear something that made the Academy less guilty. Dr. Sen slid my cassette transcript forward. The allegation was time-stamped before the seating manipulation, before the exam, before candidate Marlowe submitted answers, and before any accusation against candidate Calder existed. The predicted behaviors occurred in sequence. The lawyer shifted. A prediction can be manufactured. So can a seating change, Dr. Sen said. But this one has an audit trail. Mrs. Ansell presented it. The young invigilator began sweating visibly. Celeste's mother whispered, "Don't say anything." Unfortunately for her, the Academy had already suspended the invigilator's access and offered him a cooperation agreement before the hearing. Fear makes weak people loyal only until they see a smaller cliff. He confessed in fragments. Celeste's mother had asked for an accommodation adjustment, said it was harmless, said the girls studied better near each other, said donors expected fairness for promising students. He claimed he did not know about the device. Maybe that was true. Maybe he only sold the door and did not ask what would enter. Either way, the door had his fingerprints on it. Then came the technical report. A gray-haired engineer from the City Testing Authority appeared on video, visibly delighted to be discussing something horrifying. He explained that the bracelet contained a concealed neuro-assistive receiver capable of interpreting stress-linked confidence signals from a paired adhesive sensor. It could not read thoughts in the fantasy sense, he said, which made Celeste's lawyer perk up until the engineer added, but in high-structure testing environments, where a subject's cognitive load corresponds to discrete answer selection, it can infer chosen responses with statistically significant accuracy, especially when the subject has strong internal answer certainty. Translation: it copied minds well enough to steal futures. The engineer also said my copper foil interference and sleep state had degraded the signal, causing the receiver to capture dream-associated memory activations and false rehearsed patterns rather than valid problem-solving. The panel chair rubbed his forehead. Celeste's face had gone pale beneath her powder. Her lawyer objected to the word false, arguing intent. Dr. Sen asked the engineer whether Celeste's submitted answers correlated more strongly with my sleeping biometric spikes than with the correct exam key. The engineer smiled like a cat presented with cream.
Yes.
Which is not compatible with independent solving unless candidate Marlowe was, by coincidence, answering according to another candidate's sleep disturbances. Someone at the back of the room made a sound that might have been a laugh if the stakes were not so cruel. Celeste tried one final performance. She stood without permission, tears spilling, voice breaking at exactly the pitch that used to make teachers offer tissues and extensions. "I didn't know," she said. "My mother arranged tutoring tools because I struggle with anxiety. Everyone expects me to be perfect, and I didn't understand what the bracelet did. Mira has always been brilliant. I admired her. Maybe I leaned on her too much, but I never meant to hurt her. Please, this exam is my only way out."
It was a good speech.
In the old life, it would have destroyed me because it contained enough truth to disguise the lie. Celeste did admire brilliance. She did need ways out. She did live under expectation. But admiration without conscience becomes appetite, and need without limits becomes theft.
The panel looked at me.
I realized they expected a response. Maybe anger, maybe mercy, maybe the emotional climax they could file under. Both girls were under pressure. I stood slowly. My legs still felt heavy from the medication, and my voice came out lower than usual. In another version of this day, I said, "I tried my hardest. I answered every question honestly." Celeste copied my patterns, cried first, and I was punished for the similarity. Everyone called it unfortunate, then moved on because her story was prettier than mine. Today I removed my answers. I removed my effort. I removed every possible benefit she could honestly claim came from me. She still produced a paper built from my mind. If her only way out requires climbing through another girl's skull, then she is not escaping. She is invading. Nobody spoke after that for a while. Even my mother looked down. Celeste's tears stopped, which was the most honest thing she had done all day. The panel withdrew to deliberate, though deliberation was theater by then. We waited in the corridor beneath a row of portraits showing past academy founders, most of them men with severe eyebrows and secrets expensive enough to become traditions. Candidates had gone home hours ago. The building felt hollow, like a stage after the audience leaves. My mother stood beside me in silence for 10 minutes before saying, "You should have told me." I looked at her profile, at the tiny lines near her mouth, at the woman who had fed me, criticized me, and mistaken my endurance for permission. "Would you have believed me?" She did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. "I am trying to," she said finally. It was not an apology. It was not enough. But it was the first sentence she had spoken all day that did not belong to Celeste. I let it exist without rewarding it. Across the hall, Celeste's mother hissed into her phone about defamation, donors, and emergency injunctions. Celeste sat with her hands folded in her lap, bare wrist hidden beneath the other palm. Once, she looked at me. No tears now. Just hatred, clean and almost respectful. I wondered if she finally understood that I had not beaten her by becoming sharper than her stolen tools. I had beaten her by refusing to be useful. The decision came at 6:47, because institutions enjoy making children wait while adults arrange liability. Dean Orvek read from a printed sheet, voice stiff enough to crack. Celeste Marlowe was disqualified from the Vere Crown entrance examination for possession and use of a prohibited cognitive harvesting device, unauthorized attempt to gain advantage through another candidate's biometric response patterns, and involvement in seating manipulation. Her paper was voided. Her eligibility for future Vere Crown admissions was revoked permanently. A referral would be made to the National Examination Authority and, because the device crossed legal restrictions, to youth cyber offenses and academic integrity regulators. The young invigilator was suspended pending termination. Celeste's mother was removed from the Donor Advisory Council, and all access logs linked to her terminal would be audited. My own session result would be recorded as no attempt due to protected integrity preservation, not failure or misconduct. I would be offered a supervised alternate sitting within 7 days with independent monitors and no candidates within signal range. The wording mattered. No attempt, not zero. Protected integrity preservation, not disruption. I had slept through the entrance exam and still kept my future alive because I had forced the system to name what I had done correctly. Celeste made a small sound when permanently landed. Her mother grabbed her arm. The lawyer asked for appeal procedures. Dr. Sen said, "You will receive them in writing." Mrs. Ansell stamped the decision with the same heavy red stamp she had used that morning. I loved that stamp more than some relatives. News spread before sunset. It always does when a golden statue falls hard enough to dent the floor. By the time my mother and I reached the academy steps, reporters had gathered at the gates, confused but hungry. The official statement was careful: candidate disqualified, prohibited assistive technology, integrity review ongoing. But careful statements only feed speculation, and speculation loves a pretty villain almost as much as it loves a pretty victim. Cameras flashed when Celeste emerged behind us with her coat over her wrist and her mother's hand clamped around her shoulder. Someone shouted, "Celeste, did you cheat?" Another shouted, "Mira, were you targeted?" I did not answer. In the first life, I had begged the world to hear me after it had already decided I was guilty. This time, silence served me better. I walked past the cameras with my blank exam booklet sealed in evidence, my milk tea bottle in a lab bag, and the strange dignity of a girl who had slept while her enemy condemned herself in ink. At the gate, my mother reached for my arm, maybe to guide me, maybe to claim me. I moved half a step away. She noticed. Pain crossed her face, brief and real. Good, I thought, then hated myself for thinking it. Rebirth did not make me pure. It made me awake. That night, I did not go home immediately. I asked my mother to take my brother and leave me at the hospital where my father was still alive in this timeline, thinner than he should have been but not yet hollowed out by years of disappointment. He was in a shared ward with a crossword puzzle on his blanket and reading glasses slipping down his nose. When he saw me, he smiled before remembering to worry. "How was the exam?" In my first life, I lied to him for weeks because the truth seemed too heavy for a sick man. This time, I sat beside his bed, took his hand, and said, "Complicated." I slept through it. His eyebrows rose. Then, because he was my father, he asked the correct question. On purpose. I laughed so suddenly that the woman in the next bed looked over. Yes. He listened to the whole story without interrupting except once to say, "Good use of copper," which made me cry harder than any apology could have. When I finished, he squeezed my hand with the strength he still had. "You know you are not your score, Mira." "I know." "No, you don't. You know scores are not enough. That is different." I looked at him, then really looked. In both lives, I had loved him as the parent who believed in me, but I had still built too much of myself around proving that belief correct. He tapped the back of my hand. "Take the alternate exam because you want the door, not because you think the door decides your worth." That sentence stayed with me longer than the panel decision. The week before, my alternate sitting became a strange little island between disaster and future. Celeste's disqualification consumed the city's education gossip. Some people defended her, of course. There are always people who see a thief caught in velvet and call the velvet evidence of innocence. They said pressure had broken her, that technology was confusing, that ambitious girls should not be destroyed by one mistake. Others wanted details so they could enjoy the fall properly. The academy locked down information, but leaks appeared anyway. The bracelet scan, the seating audit, the phrase sleep stage disruptions, which became a meme by Tuesday. Someone posted an edited image of Celeste answering exam questions while I snored beside a giant dream cloud full of letters. I should have hated it. Instead, I saved it privately, because sometimes survival is ridiculous and deserves a souvenir. At home, my mother moved around me like a person learning the layout of a room after the furniture has changed. She did not apologize in one dramatic speech. That would have been too easy. She made soup without mentioning Celeste. She stopped comparing me to anyone. On Wednesday, she stood in my doorway and said, "I read the transcript." I waited.
She swallowed.
"I am ashamed that you knew exactly how I would react. There are apologies that ask to be comforted, and there are apologies that kneel without demanding a hand. This one was somewhere in between." I said, "I am too tired to forgive you quickly." She nodded, eyes wet. "Then don't do it quickly." It was the first wise thing she had said to me in years I had technically not lived yet. Celeste tried to reach me on Thursday. Not directly. People like her rarely approach without a stage. She sent Liana, my cousin, who had hovered at the edges of both lives with the flexible morality of someone who always backed the winner. Liana found me outside the public library after my practice session, wearing a pink coat and an expression of injured diplomacy. "Mira, this is getting out of hand," she said, as if I had personally inflated the scandal with a bicycle pump. "Celeste's family is ruined. Her mother says the academy is making an example of her because of donors' politics. Couldn't you say you were confused? Not lie, exactly. Just say you don't want charges." I looked at her for a long moment. In the first life, Liana's testimony that I had seemed obsessed with Celeste helped bury my appeal. She probably did not remember making that choice because for her it had not happened yet. I remembered enough for both of us. "Did Celeste send you?" Liana's eyes slid away. "She's devastated." "Good." Liana flinched as if I had slapped her. "That's cruel."
No.
Cruel is asking the person someone tried to hollow out to help polish the knife. She stared, offended by a metaphor she could not use against me. I stepped around her. "Tell Celeste she should study for whatever future is left to her using only her own mind. It will feel unfamiliar at first." Liana called after me, "You've changed." I did not turn around. Of all the accusations I had survived, that was the only one that sounded like praise. On the morning of the alternate exam, I did not drink milk tea. I drank water, ate the rice rolls my mother packed without commentary, and took the shuttle alone. The academy had arranged a smaller room in the old library wing with 2 external monitors, a signal jammer, biometric recording, and no other candidates. Mrs. Ansell checked my ID herself. "No naps today?" she asked dryly. I smiled. "Only if the essay prompt is insulting."
She almost laughed.
Dr. Sen stood near the window, reviewing documents. "You understand," she said, "that your score today will be evaluated independently. No adjustment for what happened." I wouldn't want one. That was true. I did not want pity points. Pity had always been another way for institutions to keep ownership of the story. I sat at the single desk, felt the clean weight of a new booklet beneath my hands, and let my real memory palace open for the first time since rebirth. The rooms were still there beneath the rubble I had scattered. I walked through them carefully, writing chairs, washing false letters from walls, taking my formulas down from where I had hidden them. When the clock began, I solved. Not frantically. Not to prove Celeste wrong. Not to rescue my mother's pride, or justify my father's faith, or force a dead timeline to apologize. I solved because the problems were beautiful, because my mind belonged to me, because every answer I wrote was a door nobody else had touched. For 3 hours, the room was silent except for my pencil, and this time the silence was clean. The results came 5 days later during a rainstorm that turned the streetlights blurry and silver. Ver Crown posted scores through a secure portal at 6 p.m. because apparently no academy decision could occur at a humane hour. My family gathered in the living room despite my protests. My mother on the couch clutching a mug she had not drunk from, my brother pretending not to care while hovering behind the armchair, my father on video call from the hospital with his glasses already fogged. I logged in at 6:03 because I refused to let a portal make me punctual. The screen loaded slowly enough to age us all. Then my result appeared. Admitted, full merit scholarship, rank 1 in the alternate sitting, score certified under external supervision. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then my brother screamed so loudly the neighbor banged the wall. My father covered his face. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a sob and a laugh, and reached for me without quite touching, waiting for permission. I gave it with a nod. She hugged me carefully, as if I were both daughter and evidence. "I am proud of you," she whispered. The sentence should have healed everything. It did not. Healing is not a switch. But it entered the room and stayed there, and that was more than the old life had given me. My phone buzzed with messages. Classmates, teachers, reporters, unknown numbers. One notification stood out from an education news account. Marlowe family files appeal in disqualification case. I looked at it, then turned the phone face down. Some people keep fighting after the verdict because fighting is easier than becoming honest. Let them. The appeal failed in less than a month. By then, the scandal had widened beyond Celeste into something the Academy could no longer frame as one ambitious girl's mistake. The National Examination Authority audited 3 years of Ver Crown admissions and found anomalous biometric similarity patterns in several sessions linked to candidates who had trained at the same private center Celeste used. The neurofeedback startup that made the bracelet denied wrongdoing until procurement emails surfaced, showing they had marketed performance synchronization tools to wealthy families using phrases like discrete advantage and confidence alignment. Celeste's mother resigned from 2 boards. The invigilator lost his position and, according to Liana's whispered updates, blamed everyone except the hand that took the favor. Celeste herself disappeared from public view for a while. No more charity panels. No more glossy profiles. No more golden girls smiling beneath headlines about merit. When she finally released a statement, it was 3 paragraphs of passive verbs. Mistakes were made, pressure was experienced, boundaries were misunderstood. Not once did she say she stole. Not once did she say my name. I printed the statement, folded it, and placed it in a box with my stamped receipt, the cassette copy, and the alternate exam admission letter. Not because I wanted to remember Celeste forever, but because evidence had become a language I trusted. When the world gaslights you once, you learn to keep receipts even for your own healing. Ver Crown was not paradise. That disappointed my younger self for about 3 days. The halls were beautiful, the library enormous, the teachers brilliant when they were not worshipping their own reputations, and the students just as human as anywhere else, kind, cruel, frightened, funny, hungry. Some avoided me because scandal stains even when you are the target. Some admired me for the wrong reasons, turning my sleep into a legend as if I had beaten corruption by being quirky instead of terrified. A few asked whether I could teach them memory traps for exams, which made me consider becoming a hermit. But there were also people who met me without wanting to use me. A girl named Hannah shared her annotated history notes and never once asked what really happened. A boy in my logic seminar argued with me for 20 minutes about a proof, lost, and grinned like losing honestly was a sport. Dr. Sen visited once as part of an external oversight lecture and paused beside my desk afterward. "How is your mind?" she asked. "Not your grades. Not your adjustment. Your mind." I thought about the dream corridors, the poisoned bait, the way I had turned sleep into a shield. "Mine," I said. She nodded as if that were a complete clinical report. "Keep it that way." I tried. Months later, on Founders' Day, the Academy unveiled a revised integrity policy in the same Hall of Ascension where I had slept through my own supposed future. The desks were gone, replaced by rows of chairs and a podium. Parents filled the back. Students whispered under banners about honor, which still sounded funny to me coming from embroidered fabric. Dean Orvek gave a speech about modern challenges, technological ethics, and renewed commitment. It was polished enough to slide off truth without absorbing much. Then Mrs. Ansell, unexpectedly promoted to Director of Candidate Records, stepped up and spoke for 3 minutes in plain language about why procedures exist to protect people, not reputations. I clapped hardest for her. My mother sat beside me and clapped too. We were still learning how to be in the same room without old ghosts choosing our seats, but she was trying in ways that cost her pride, which mattered more than trying when it was easy. After the ceremony, we walked past the sealed exam hall. Through the glass, I saw my reflection layered over rows of empty desks. For a moment, the old timeline pressed close, me accused, me begging, me drowning under files nobody would read. Then my brother appeared behind me and stuck 2 fingers over my head like rabbit ears. I elbowed him. The ghost receded. Some hauntings do not vanish because justice arrives. They leave because life gets noisy enough to drown them out. I saw Celeste one last time that year outside the city courthouse, where her family's final appeal was dismissed. I had not planned to attend, but Dr. Sen asked whether I wanted to submit a victim impact statement, and I decided my silence had served its purpose. Celeste stood on the courthouse steps in a navy coat, hair darker than before, face thinner, no gold ribbon, no bracelet. For the first time, she looked like a person instead of a symbol someone had polished. That did not make me forgive her. Humanity is not innocence. She watched me approach with an expression I could not read. "You ruined my life," she said quietly, without tears. I considered all the answers I might have given. You ruined mine first. You tried to. You only lost what you stole. Instead I said, no. I stopped lending you mine. Her mouth tightened. You think you're better than me now? No, that surprised her. It surprised me a little too, because once I had wanted superiority as proof of survival. I think I know where I end and you begin. That is enough. She looked away first. A reporter called her name. Her mother pulled her toward a waiting car. I stood on the steps until they left, feeling no triumph exactly. Triumph is loud and short. What I felt was space. The kind of space you feel when a thief finally removes her hand from your pocket and you realize the sky has been above you the whole time. Years later, people would still tell the story incorrectly. They would say I beat the entrance exam by sleeping through it, as if laziness had become strategy. They would say Celeste copied my dreams, as if the whole thing were a fairy tale with better lighting. They would forget Mrs. Ansell's stamp, Dr. Sen's questions, the copper foil, the receipt hidden in my admission card, the fact that a blank paper can be evidence if you know who needs it filled. They would ask me in interviews whether I had planned everything perfectly. I always said no. Perfect plans belong in fiction. Real plans shake. Real plans involve a 17-year-old girl drinking medicated milk tea in a bathroom and hoping she wakes up with her future still salvageable. Real plans require help from cautious registrars, ethical examiners, hospital bed fathers, and the small mercy of a camera pointed in the right direction. What I planned was not victory. It was refusal. I refused to feed the machine that had eaten me once. I refused to let Celeste turn my effort into her halo. I refused to perform innocence in a language designed to make me sound guilty. Sleeping through that exam was the most awake thing I had ever done. There was one more lesson nobody put in the official reports. When the Academy asked me a year later to speak to incoming candidates about integrity, they expected a neat moral about honesty defeating cheating. I stood at the podium, looked at a sea of nervous faces, and told them something less comfortable. Do not confuse being useful with being loved, I said. Do not confuse someone admiring your mind with someone respecting your right to own it. And when a system asks you to prove you were harmed, understand that evidence is not cynicism. Evidence is care for the future version of yourself who may be too tired to explain. The teachers in the front row shifted because speeches are supposed to flatter institutions, not warn children about them. But several students sat up straighter. One girl near the aisle touched her own wrist as if suddenly aware that boundaries could be physical, intellectual, invisible, and still real. Afterward, she found me near the exit and whispered that her tutor always demanded to see her drafts before competitions, then submitted similar essays through another student. She asked what she should do. I did not give her revenge. Revenge is a blade, and not every child needs to carry one. I gave her steps. Save originals, timestamp files, send copies to yourself, document conversations, tell the safest adult first, and never warn the person stealing from you before your proof is somewhere they cannot reach. She nodded like I had handed her a map out of a room she had not known had doors. That was when I understood my story had become larger than Celeste. The best revenge was not that she lost my future. It was that other girls learned to lock theirs before anyone touched the handle. So if you want a clean ending, here it is. I entered Vare Crown, graduated first in my cohort, and built a career designing examination safeguards that made cognitive harvesting tools useless before rich families could rename them tutoring aids. My father lived long enough to see me give a lecture in a hall bigger than the one where I had once slept, and afterward he told everyone nearby that his daughter had weaponized a nap, which was embarrassing and completely accurate. My mother and I did not become magically whole, but we became honest, which is rarer and harder. Liana eventually sent an apology that used the word uncomfortable 3 times and responsible once. I accepted the responsible part and ignored the rest. Celeste was barred from national scholarship examinations for life. She studied elsewhere under strict monitoring, quietly, without cameras. Maybe she learned. Maybe she only learned to hate me better. I stopped needing to know. The last time I opened my old evidence box, the silver star patch was not inside because the authorities kept it, But the receipt was there, red stamp faded slightly, proof that before the world saw anything, I had known. I touched the paper and remembered the Hall of Ascension, the cold desk beneath my cheek, the proctor's shoes beside me, Celeste writing furiously from a mind that had gone dark on purpose. Then I closed the box. Some girls win by shining so brightly, everyone looks at them. I won by turning out the lights and letting the thief run confidently into the dark.